As of 2017, 95% of CHamoros below the age of 31 on Guam cannot hold a basic conversation in Chamorro. This is in stark contrast to the 1940s, where practically every Chamorro was fluent in the Chamorro language. So in just a span of a few generations, Chamoros have developed into an almost monolingual generation of English speakers, Pulan, and we will find out what happened after the 1940s, which caused so many Chamoros today to be unable to speak their language. The primary reasons for the decline of the Chamorro language is due to the combination of colonialism and rapid socio-economic change. Let me explain. Chamoros have been colonized for around 350 years, the longest of any Pacific Islanders. First by Spain in 1668, the Marianas was then officially divided in 1899, with the US taking Guam and Germany taking the Northern Marianas. Focusing on Guam, one important institution that the US naval government used to change the Chamorro people was the education system, which was staffed by white Americans reflecting American values, structure, and education curricula, rather than a Chamorro worldview. English was the medium of instruction, and as historian Ann Hattori argues, one of the fundamental requirements for the transformation of Chamorro society was the use of the English language as part of the colonial government's project to instill American values and patriotism in the Chamorro psyche. To further promote English in Guam, the American Naval Administration implemented no Chamorro policies. In 1917, the Naval Government Executive General Order 243 attempted to ban the speaking of Chamorro and designated English as the only official language of Guam, and ordered that Chamorro must not be spoken except for official interpreting. In the schools, children who were caught speaking Chamorro were penalized. Yet despite the colonial government's efforts, Chamorro was still the primary language of the youth, many of whom had little to no knowledge of English. Overall, the results of the modernization and Americanization left U.S. officials unsatisfied. As stated by scholar Vince Diaz, modernization and Americanization didn't have the traction that U.S. officials thought they should, especially among the common folk, who seemed to prefer speaking the Chamorro language to speaking English, and who appeared more interested in their supposedly sleepy ways of subsistence farming, fishing, and hunting. Chamoros didn't fully embrace English because speaking English was not relevant in their daily lives. Chamoros generally lived a subsistence type of lifestyle, which revolved around the church, village, ranch, and family. Thus, Chamoros continued to raise their children with the Chamorro language. However, this would all soon change. After World War II, Guam became an important strategic base for the United States to project power in the Asia-Pacific region. The US began building up Guam as the unsinkable aircraft carrier. On a local political level, the government of Guam was formed in 1950. And in line with the idea that Chamoros are now American citizens and a developing modern society, English was made the official language of Guam. The military construction projects and the newly formed government of Guam gave hundreds of Chamoros for the first time the opportunity to work at wage jobs, rather than living by subsistence farming. Many Chamoros also did not have a real choice but to become wage workers due to the loss of land from wartime damages and military land seizures. Furthermore, in 1962, the security clearance was lifted, opening Guam to tourists from the economically booming Japan and other US-friendly Asian countries. This brought in massive economic development, construction, and an emerging private sector to the island, and together with military and government employment, solidified the shift from a subsistence lifestyle to a cash economy. And in order to participate in this cash economy, to gain employment as a wage worker, knowledge of English was required. Thus, CHamoros learned English because it was necessary for their success in this cash economy in a post-war society. As Robert Underwood stated, the message of English and occupational success had little application in the subsistence economy of pre-war Guam. The post-war occupational picture seemed to validate in dollars and cents the economic components of the ideology of English. In addition, education became compulsory to the high school level. Whereas before the war, for most Chamorro children, schooling ended before the 6th grade level. And compulsory education was conducted exclusively in English. This drive for Chamorros to learn and speak English came at the direct expense of the Chamorro language. Chamorros rationalized that they must primarily speak English to their children, as English was now considered the language of success because it provided access to employment and education. So this post-World War II generational decision to not raise their children in the Chamorro language, but rather English, is what started the almost irreversible damage to the intergenerational transmission of the Chamorro language that affects us to this day. By 1972, a report indicated that the majority of Chamorro children in kindergarten had English as their first language, and a cultural survey in 1974 indicated that the majority of Chamorro elementary students had little to no knowledge of the Chamorro language. So within one generation, English replaced Chamorro as the first language for the majority of young Chamorros on Guam. You might be angrily thinking to yourself, well, how could they? Why didn't they speak to their children in Chamorro? But you have to remember that this post-war generation experienced incredible rapid changes. No longer did Chamorros need to commit their lives to subsistence farming, as they are now able to get educated and work for wages from federal jobs, an emerging private sector, and the government of Guam. English was understandably seen as the language of the future, and they did not want their children to go through these struggles to learn English as many of them had. Thus, that generation did not speak Chamorro to their children, not out of malicious intent, but out of the love and the desire for a better future for their children. There were also other factors which made the situation around the Chamorro language even worse. The media was primarily in English. There was a fascination with American popular culture and entertainment. The common language of commerce and interaction between all the ethnic groups in Guam was English. The No Chamorro policies continued in the schools until the 1970s. There were no official language policies by the government of Guam to promote the Chamorro language or halt its decline, again until the 1970s. There were widespread linguistic misconceptions, such as the idea that speaking Chamorro and English to a child would cause mental confusion or conflict. Thus, the socioeconomic and sociolinguistic context of a post-war Guam advantaged English-only language learning to the detriment of continuing the intergenerational transmission of the Chamorro language. And with every passing generation, fewer and fewer Chamorros acquired Chamorro as their native language from their parents. Where finally, as of 2017, 95% of Chamorros below the age of 31 cannot even hold a basic conversation in Chamorro. And the majority of fluent Chamorro speakers are all above the age of 65. By 2050, the vast majority of native Chamorro speakers will be gone. In the Northern Marianas, Due to having a different socio-political history from Guam, the language replacement process to English started later and at a much slower rate from Guam. However, it is now clear that many Chamorro and Refalawash children in the CNMI are becoming English-only speakers, caused primarily by socio-economic changes similar to what occurred in Guam. There is hope for the Chamorro language. In part 2, I will explore public and private efforts at revitalizing the Chamorro language. Dunklu Sidus Masi for watching. Pulan has spoken. Esta.